Okay, I apologize. Here I go again. So I was saying that these old kilns, these adobe kilns, were very common in Mexico, going clear back to prehistoric times. But that technology never made it to the American Southwest, where I live now. So there's a long history of their use down there. Now, I learned about these kilns from these people called Paul and Laurel Thornburg. Paul and Laurel Thornburg taught me a lot of what I know about pottery, or at least got me started on that road back when I was a kid, by giving me some clues and showing me where to dig clay and, these kind of things. And they had a big adobe kiln in their yard, very similar to these Mexican kilns that I just showed you. And they used it to make members pottery, okay? So members, I've talked about it in previous videos, but you may not have seen those. Members pottery is very popular with collectors of Southwest pottery because there's lots of pictures of people and animals and birds and fish and things. It's very interesting to look at. But members pottery is made with reduced iron. And so in order to reduce the iron, you have to get it really hot, and then you have to cut off the oxygen. And that's hard to do in an open firing. Even in a trench kiln, it's hard to cut off all the oxygen. So the Thornburgs used this big adobe kiln so they could get it really hot, and then they could just put a lid on it, cover up the front, seal it off basically, keep the oxygen out, and make reduced iron pottery. So it worked real good for them. And I thought, wow, that's a really great idea. It was interesting to me, not because I was trying to make reduced iron pottery, but because it used a lot less fuel. It was very fuel efficient. So one thing that all potters, well, especially potters that fire with wood, or like southwestern potters who are firing like in an open fire, one of the problems they have is they use a lot of wood. So like even like people that use dung, like up at Hopi, for example, they use sheep dung. They buy it. They bring in truckloads of sheep manure. Like they spend thousands of dollars on truckloads of sheep manure that they stack outside their house to do the firing. So they're constantly having to bring in more fuel. And so it's very fuel inefficient to have an open fire because most of that heat is going out as radiant heat and it's going up as convective heat. It's being lost. It's not helping to fire the pottery at all. Just a small pour, kind of like the sun, right? Like we get like 1/1000% of the sun's energy on the earth. And so when you build out an open fire, most of that heat is going away from the pottery, not towards the pottery. So it's very fuel efficient. So this is the first one I built. Well, the first one I built, I actually dug a hole into a bank on an arroyo, and then I dug in, so I had this little tunnel going in, and I could load the pottery here and put the fire in here, and it wasn't very good. But it did fire with very little fuel used, okay? So that was cool. Now, then I went to this, and this is just bricks. This is some old bricks I had laying around my house. I just dug out a little channel, laid the bricks in there, and I would load the fuel at the top, and then I would load the pots in the top. I would load the fuel in the bottom, and then I used those bricks at the top as kind of a damper to, close or open depending on how much air I wanted to get through there. And, it was okay. It was better than nothing. So here we go. I'll show you the next one. After that, I said, well, I'm going to build. I have to remember to put the transition button, I'm going to build one of these big adobe ones like the Thornburgs had. Well, I didn't. At this point, it had been years since I'd seen their kiln. So I was working off memory, and I wasn't really sure of all the technical details. I was just doing my best. And if you look at those pictures of those Mexican kilns I was showing you, you can tell how big around they are. But if you can't get down and stick your head in the firebox, you can't really see what's going on. So I'm making assumptions about what was going on in there. Now, this is what I did wrong. You see how I filled that all in with earth around there, and the firebox is just a little channel going in. That's not the right way. The whole thing needs to be firebox. Okay, it needs to be all open so there can be fire underneath everything, and under all the pots they have hot air coming up. This is not the right way to do it. So let me show you the next screen. Here it is, being constructed. And this is called puddled adobe. So I'm not making bricks. BJ, I did see your post, and I've just been busy getting ready for this live stream this morning, so I haven't had a chance to respond, but I will later today. So this is puddled adobe. I'm mixing up the mud, and I'm just kind of with my hands just forming it on the wall. And so I laid up a course, and then I'd go, do something else for an hour, and I'd come back, and it will have dried enough that it's firm. And then I just hand mold it, just like it's similar like coiling pottery, right? Just lay a coil, use your hands to kind of mold it, then let it set and kind of firm up, and then come back and you can do another. And you could see here I've done 4 courses on this day, and this, I could keep doing more courses as long as they were able to firm up a little bit. And I would stick rocks. I had a lot of rocks out here where I lived in the desert at this time, and so I'd stick rocks in it, not only to take up space, because that was mud I didn't have to dig and mix, but then that would help tie in the different courses. So each time a course was done, I'd stick some rocks in it that were sticking up. That way when I put on the next course, they would be tied together with those rocks. That's not necessary, but that does help. So here's my operation. I've got a wheelbarrow and a cement mixer, and I was able to just dig up the ground right where I was there, scoop it up with the shovel, throw it in there, mix it up, and build it. And I'll show you the problems with this kiln. Oh, I forgot to hit the transition button. Yeah, see? Here it is again. There's my mixer. I apologize. I'm getting new software, guys. I apologize. It sucks. So here I am with my finished kiln. Showing it off. I'm proud of my work, and you can see there's ash in there. I've either already fired pottery, or maybe I just built a little warming fire in there. I don't remember. It was quite a few years ago. So this was probably 2004, 2005, something like that. So here's the problem I had, right? The place where the fire came out was just a small opening in the bottom of this. And then I had all that kind of a shelf around it. Well, what I found was any pottery that was stacked on that shelf, where not over the heat, would not get fired correctly, and it would be all kind of black and sooty. It had to be over the hole. The hole itself was relatively small. And so I had this huge space that I had to heat up. Extremely inefficient. I took to stacking sherds all around the pottery to kind of hold in that heat over that little area. That way I could get hot inside of there, and I wouldn't have to get the whole area to the right temperature. It was inefficient, but it did work. And here's shows you how I was covering the top. So in order to control the amount of heat I was letting out, you couldn't just leave it open. You'd never get that pottery to temp, it would take a long time because you're losing a lot to the top. So I had this piece of cement board that I would slide over the top and kind of use it as a damper. I could pull it closer, or I'd open it more depending on what I was trying to do. Like again, fairly inefficient. So I sold that house in 2006, I think. So this is years later. This is 2014, 15 maybe, in Sierra Vista, and I was going to build another, but I was going to build it smaller. I realized that the size was ridiculous on that one. So I just said, I just want it to test fire or just quickly fire a couple of pieces. So I built it large enough that I could put a fairly large pot in it, but I didn't need a whole load to fire it efficiently. And the other thing I did here is I built it off the ground. So at the start, this is like the first or maybe the second course, I'm just building up kind of a layer. That way it's not on the ground, because I was worried that when it rained, I didn't want that water to kind of go inside of the door, and then I would have to wait for it to dry out before I could fire. So I built it up off the ground a little bit, which was pretty smart, I think. So now you can see I've built about three courses that are just flat. And then I'm starting to build the kiln on top of that. That way the kiln's a little bit elevated. And so I'm just making like a letter C there, so I have an opening. And then I'm going to close that off on the next one. So here it is. You can see the firebox opening is closed. I put actually a piece of sandstone over the top as like a lintel, and then I just built the adobe across that. And then if you look inside, do you see the rocks? There's a couple of rocks sticking out. I left rocks sticking out right where I wanted the grate to set the pottery on. That way I could drop like a piece of metal in there or like a barbecue grill or something, and it would set on top of those rocks. I could pull the grate out and replace it if I needed to. The rocks would stay there. And so that was a pretty good way to do it. And so here it is done. You can see the piece of sandstone that's over the firebox there. And the problem with this kiln was there wasn't a big enough firebox. So I could stuff that firebox full of fuel and it wouldn't be enough to really get the temperature up real good. Now it has a lot of mass, and that way it's better than the brick one I have now. But I always thought what I want to do next is build the firebox, farther out, so I can get longer pieces of wood in there and I can get more wood burning at one time. And I moved from that house in 2018, so I never got a chance to make those changes. Here it is being fired, and you can see I'm using a piece of cement board at the top the same way I was using cement board on the last one. And this is the last photo I have. In this case, I don't have that shelf around the outside, so all the pottery is stacked over the fuel, and that was more efficient. It was getting more heat up there. I still had some things to learn, but this was a good step forward as far as that was. Now the things I've learned since then, the main changes I've made is I've elevated the firebox on a grate so that I've got air always able to go in. That way the whole firebox doesn't fill up with ash and coal and you can't get any oxygen in. I've cut more holes in to allow oxygen in, and I built an ad hoc chimney on top of that instead of just a piece of cement board or a couple of bricks to cause more draw. So if you have a little bit of a chimney, you get more draw, like a fireplace, and then you can get more air moving through there and it'll get a lot hotter. Let me catch up with the chats really quick. Fancycraft says, I made pretty much the same kiln and I'm having the same issues. Going to try a stone beehive shape next. Fancy, stick with me because I'm going to show you the changes I've made, and it might help you. Have heard of downdraft beehive kilns. They are supposed to be efficient, more reliable. Okay, I don't know about that, Dylan. Fancycraft. Waldmensch. I once used a grate that was so thin it just bent, and all my oh my, that's too bad. Yeah, so when I bought a grate, Waldenmensch, I bought a heavy-duty barbecue grate. And on this one that's pictured right here, I actually went to a welding shop and just had them cut a piece of them. I took a measurement and I had them cut a piece of expanded metal. And it will over time. Now, even a heavy piece of metal can over time kind of warp from all the repeated heating. So you can pull it out and hammer it back flat or flip it over so that, it'll warp the other way over time, or replace it. But you don't want to go too thin for sure. You will be sorry. Okay, let me show you the video. I have a little video here, and hopefully you'll still have sound, huh? So this is the one I'm using now, and I just use bricks, and I just set them in mud, and this is just some clay. I went down with my truck. I picked up a load of clay, and I mixed it about 50% clay and 50% sand. So I got sand out of a wash, got clay out of a clay bed. And now some of these bricks I drilled holes in, and that was so I could stick a bolt that would hold that grate over the fire. So here I am laying it up, and you can see I'm starting to kind of close in over the top of the firebox. And I think this brick I'm setting is one that has the hole in it. When I move my thumb, you'll see the hole I drilled in it. Yeah, so that's where the pottery is going to sit, right at that level. So yeah, just using bricks I got at Home Depot. These are just regular bricks. They're not fire bricks. But I'm firing to pretty low temperatures. I'm not firing over about 900 degrees Celsius. So these bricks were probably fired hotter than that when they were made. And I haven't seen any, problems with the bricks so far. Now I built a little firebox coming out. That's an improvement over the last one, so I can get more fuel in there. And eventually I may even bring that firebox even farther out so I can get more fuel in there. So now I have my grate sitting in there on those bolts, but are just slipped into those holes. They're not attached in any way. I left a hole in the side so that I could insert a thermocouple, and that way I can know, what temperature I'm at in there. Now, this is my first firing, and I was just using bricks on the top to kind of control the draft. Like I said, that wasn't the most efficient way to do it. I also was using a fan, you might have noticed there, to push more air. Now, here's the problem. You see, the firebox is all full of fuel and coals, and there's no other way for air to get in there. And so it's just smothering at this point. So I'm making some changes here. Here I'm loading those mugs in. You might have seen that mug video. It's a couple weeks ago I released it. And you can see my thermocouple there next to the mugs. And now once I've loaded the pottery, then I take these loose bricks and I stack them around the top, forming a chimney. These are not set in mud in any way. They're just set there. But forming that chimney really helps create more draw, and it kind of holds in some of that heat too. So this is a real improvement. And then in the front, you can see I've built a grate, and that grate is sitting up on little bricks. So there's always oxygen flow down below, and I can reach in and clean out if it gets full of ash in there, and that allows oxygen to come in. The other thing I did is I cut 2 more oxygen holes at the bottom on either side. You can't see them here, but I'll show you in a second. So you see the fire is cooking real good, and I can get oxygen underneath at all times. So it's much more efficient, and it's drawing oxygen from the side holes. So that really helped a lot. And I'll show you in a second here where those side holes are. So in the dark, you can see the light coming out of those side holes. There's one on either side where it also draws oxygen. The other thing I'm doing is, as I'm firing, instead of just letting it burn there in the front, once the wood starts burning, I just take the stick and just push them back in there. Because there's a much bigger opening back in there. And I just keep pushing that wood back in. And I'll set it there in the front and let it start burning. And then I push it back in. And I push it back in. And so you can get a lot more fuel burning if you keep pushing it back into that chamber behind there as you go. And this is my last firing I did. This video will come out next week where I made the Holy Grail. And I got to 850 in maybe an hour and a half. It wasn't very long, a couple hours tops. So it was pretty quick and got really hot, really efficient. And so I think now I'm really at a point where not only is the kiln's doing really well for me, it burns really efficient, and I think it's working really good for what I want to do. I'm able to get to my temperatures that I want. Like I said, now my temperatures may be less than what other people want. Some people may want to hit 1,000, 1,100 degrees Celsius. If I get to 900, I'm going to start backing it off because I don't want to melt anything. So 850, I've hit 850 twice. The last 2 firings I did at the mugs and the Holy Grail, and I hit it easily in the last time because when I was doing the mugs, I was still trying to figure out like the loading that fire and pushing it back in there. But with the Holy Grails, I got to the 850 in a hurry. I've just got it figured out. Now the hardest part sometimes is just holding it back, like not getting too hot too fast because you don't want to break things. Let me check on the chat here. Jay Lee, what type of glazes do you use with the homemade kiln? No, I've never gotten hot enough to melt glaze, Jay Lee. The only kind of glaze I could melt at the temperatures I'm reaching are like lead-based glazes, and I don't mess with. Well, I've done some lead-based paints, but I haven't done any lead-based glazes. So I really don't. I don't glaze. I make primitive pottery, so it's slipped, it's painted and decorated, but it's not glazed, and so I'm not worried about glazing. Now, there are ways to do this where you could glaze. I don't know if there's low temperature glazes. There's ways to get this hot enough. And I'll talk about in a minute, like what I would do if I wanted to get to higher temperatures. Like I said, I'm happy with 850. Those of you that want to glaze, you have other options, I suppose. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me get through these chats. No glazes in these type of kilns, Dylan. They don't get hot enough unless you're going to have to do something special if you're going to glaze, right? My pots crack when I fired them like that. BJ, you have to be careful when I'm building the fire. Like I said, you have to be careful not to heat it up too fast because you heat it too fast, you can crack them. Also, use plenty of temper so that you're protecting against some of that thermal shock as well. But you can heat them up a lot slowly if you're willing to sit out there for, an hour and just feed it little sticks and just keep that temperature slowly climbing. If you have a thermocouple, you can be aware of what the temperature is and you can kind of regulate based on adding fuel to it. Stephen Walford, I'm a skilled welder, can make a steel kiln, no problem, but loving the struggle trying to make it the old way. Yeah, well, I think the trouble, Stephen, I used to be a welder and I grew up around a welding shop. My dad was a welder. I think the problem with a steel kiln would be you don't have that thermal mass I talked about early on. So like Dylan was saying, he has a cob kiln that has thick walls, and that helps him reach higher temperatures. My brick kiln with the thin walls cools off really, really fast. If I'm not feeding that fuel in there fast enough, I can watch it on thermocouple, and that temperature will just start dropping. And then I put more wood in, and it comes right back up. But the more mass you have, the more it's going to hold that temperature. So the problem, I think, with a steel kiln would be you don't have that thermal mass. You have less thermal mass than I have with my brick kiln. Anthony, I have a kiln just like Andy's last one. I got cracked until I controlled temps going up and coming back down. Yeah, well, you have to watch your temps. It is important. Mrs. Adams, you could likely hit 06 in that type of kiln. And Mrs. Adams, do you know what 06, what temperature that is? Jeffrey Connolly, what's the advantage of using all the adobe and masonry, a 50-gallon barrel? Oh, yeah. So that's what I was saying. One, the masonry and the adobe are much cheaper than steel. A 50-gallon drum is probably going to cost more than the bricks I got from the Home Depot. The adobe is free. So price-wise, the masonry kiln is a lot more affordable. And then there's thermal mass. You have a lot of thermal mass in a masonry kiln, in a brick kiln, or in the adobe kiln especially. And that, oh crud, that's the wrong thing. Hold on, my bad. You have a lot of thermal mass, and that is holding that temperature for you. So if you go inside to use the bathroom or get a lunch, or something, you don't want to come back out and find that your kiln has gone down 200 degrees while you weren't feeding wood in the whole time. So that thermal mass is going to hold heat. It's going to help you reach those higher temperatures too. So that would be, in my opinion, that would be the advantage. And price. I think price. I know steel's expensive. And bricks are relatively inexpensive, and adobe is free. So metal is great, but the clay-based stuff keeps heat in better. Yeah, and that's why I didn't use like a lime mortar when I laid those bricks up, because the lime-based mortar, can start breaking down when it gets really hot. But using mud like that, it's just like clay. It's going to deal with it better. Now, the problem I found, and I live in a fairly dry area. My clay has the mud that I used to put those bricks up has washed out on the outside with the summer rains last summer. It's down in there, maybe an inch or two in places, just washed away. But the clay on the inside, it's fired all the way to the top. It's fired, and so it's holding together. And what I need to do probably in the next couple of months is mix up some more mud and just kind of dab it into some of those gaps, because I don't want it to fall apart. Metal is great, but yeah, 1700 to 1800 Fahrenheit. So that'd be what, like close to 1,000 degrees Celsius, Mrs. Adams. Yeah, I think I could hit here. Okay, let me talk a little bit about how I could do better. Okay, like I said, I build that ad hoc chimney, makes a huge difference. Letting more air in, breaking those air holes on the side, and making that grate in the firebox. Again, I've made a huge difference. If I wanted to get hotter, I think I would build that firebox out another brick. So I laid those bricks sideways, so that firebox comes out from the cylinder of the kiln about 6 or 7 inches. I would do another layer, so that would be like 12 or 14 inches, and I could get more wood in there at once. And I would fire over a longer period. It would also help if I had more thermal mass, like I said. I could do it with the kiln I have, but it's cooling off quickly because it's thin. It's, I don't know what the word is for it. The heat is like evaporating away the way it does on a radiator from the outside of the kiln. So more mass would be helpful. And then feeding it over a longer period of time. So like I said, I'm hitting 850. I can do it in like an hour and a half now. So that's pretty fast, right? Now, if I was going for 1,000 degrees, and I could just sit there for a couple hours and just feed wood in and feed wood in and feed wood in and feed wood in, I'm going to keep going higher and higher and higher. So I think I could hit, and I think it'd be a fun experiment. I might do a video where I, see how hot I can get it. It'd be a fun experiment. Really dig the live chat. Thanks for sharing your experience and knowledge. Thanks, D Mushroom Guy. I appreciate that. Adobe over the brick might be better than more bricks. Adobe. Oh, like if I wanted to add mass to it, like add Adobe around the brick. Yeah, like I said, I live in town. I don't really want to haul in a bunch of extra dirt. So if I wanted to add more mass, I'm not going to do that to this kiln. Because to me, 1,000 degrees is too hot, I'm just saying if I wanted to. But yeah, to me, I'm not. Excuse me. I just don't care enough to reach 1,000 degrees. It might be fun as an experiment to see if I could do it. But I'm not going to do it regularly. 850 is... For the pottery I make, 850 is more than enough. It's 5 degrees here in Montana. It would be a fun project to do now. Give me something to do. Or is it too cold? I think the problem you would have, Colleen, is that the mortar is going to need to dry out without freezing. If that mortar freezes, the mud, if that mortar freezes before it's dry, it's going to... the ice crystals will cause it to crack up and break. So if you were going to do it, you'd have to keep the kiln area from freezing. I don't know if you could put a little heater in there, put a little covering over it and a little heater or something. I don't know, but you would want to keep that mortar from freezing. That would be the biggest concern I would have, Colleen, about trying to lay up bricks in 5-degree weather. Alexander John, thank you so much. Thanks, Alexander. Appreciate you coming on here from, let's see, where were you from? Someplace in Africa. I can't remember. Zimbabwe. Am I right? That's what my kiln is built of, Dylan. What your kiln is built of? Cob? Is that right, Dylan? All right. We're gonna need more questions because I don't have any. I don't have any more content to show you guys. It's 10:35. So, do you guys have questions about kilns? I can re-show you any of those pictures if you think there's anything there worth looking at again. Here's those Mexican kilns. I'm endlessly fascinated by those. I had some pictures of the archaeological dig they did in Mexico where they found one of these, but they really weren't very clear, so I chose not to bring them in here. I never considered mortar freezing being an issue. Good to know. Well, I've done a little bit of reading about Adobe construction, and I know that's one of the things when you're building with Adobe, in the winter time, you either cover, around here, you could probably lay a blanket over the wall and it would keep it from freezing because we don't get super cold. But, in Montana, it might be more than you can do. Like when lime mortar cures, it actually creates heat because it's a chemical reaction like cement mortar. But mud mortar doesn't do that. It doesn't create heat as it cools. It actually cools off as it. It doesn't create heat as it dries. It gets cooler as it dries because it's evaporating water and that's cooling it. Rob Ragus, great stream, Andy. Very informative. I'm looking to build a brick Adobe kiln similar to yours. Approximately how long do you stay at temp to have a successful fire? 900°C for a few hours. Yeah, I don't. Rob Ragus, with the pottery I'm making, with the pottery I'm making, I don't have to hold that temperature for a long period of time. I want to make sure that if let's say I'm going for 900 degrees, as you say here, I just want to make sure the pot's 900 degrees in the middle, and it's fairly thin. I'm sure the thickness of your pottery has something to do with that, but I don't need it to be 900 degrees for an hour unless it takes an hour for it to get 900 on the inside, which it doesn't, right? So basically, when I reach my temp, which in my case is 800, like the last time when I fired the Holy Grails, I was shooting for 800 degrees, and then I stopped firing. I said, well, I'm at 800 degrees. I'd already put wood in it though, and so the temperature continued to rise. It got to 850 before it started cooling off, but I wasn't worried about it being 800 for an hour or two. I reached 800. I was good. That's what works for my pottery. I'm not telling. I don't know any about other pottery that you're doing. It's Rick and then Cob Adobe over the top. Oh, brick and then Cob Adobe over the top. Okay, Dylan, I see what you're saying. So you build it out of brick and then you put the cob around it to add that thermal mass. Have you ever used a salt glaze? No, and I don't think I can. I don't. First of all, I don't have any experience with salt glaze, so you guys tell me if I'm wrong here. But the way I understand it, you have to get that salt glaze to something like 1100 degrees Celsius in order for it to form a glaze, for that salt to melt or whatever it does. And my temperatures don't go that high. So no, I've never messed with salt glaze. I get that question pretty frequently, and I always look up on Google, what the temperature is that you need for salt glazing, and it's like 1100, 1200 degrees Celsius. I never, ever reach those temperatures. Kilns be built. Can kilns be built from any kind of dirt? Well, the dirt has to have a certain. Okay, so if you're making adobe, what you want optimally is about at least a third clay and about at least a third sand. So what they do is they'll take the dirt and they put it in a glass jar and they fill it with water, and you shake the jar up, get it all mixed, and then you set the jar and you let it sit for a day or however long it takes. And you pick up the jar and you look at it, and you can see that the sand will settle first, and then the silt, and then the clay at the top. And so you can look at the how it settled in the jar, and you can get an idea what percentage of your dirt is clay and sand. And you want at least, like I said, with mine, I actually dug clay. I went to a place where I get clay for pottery. It's pretty pure clay, and I brought back a load of clay and a load of sand in my truck, and I mixed it 50-50. So you want at least like a third clay and a third sand. So no, all dirt cannot make adobe. You have to have enough clay. But you can amend your dirt, right? So if your clay is if your dirt is a little on the sandy side, you could bring in a little clay and maybe mix, 2 scoops of your dirt and 1 scoop of clay or something to kind of get it to that proportion you want. Or if your dirt is on the clayey side, you can bring in sand and maybe do, 3 scoops of your dirt and then like a scoop of sand or something, just to get it to that point where it's gonna, and the sand is just like tempering your clay. You want to have enough that it's gonna dry without cracking too much. So it's very much like making pottery, and from making pottery that not just any dirt can be used as clay to form pottery, and it's the same way with adobe, but you can amend it. Okay, how high do you stack pots in a firing? I've never stacked them deep, but these Mexican potters here, like this, right? These guys, they fill that kiln with pottery. They'll fill it up. You just want to make sure you leave lots of room for airspace, because you want that warm air to circulate all through there, not be forced out of an area because the pots are stacked too tightly. But yeah, they'll fill it to the top, with all to the top of that adobe, and then if they build a little chimney on top, they won't fill that. But yeah, so they stack them pretty good in those kilns, in places where they use these primitive kilns. Glass Gavin, wow, thanks for the knowledge. Or just clay mud is best mortar for brick ovens and kiln, apparently. Well, it's good. I don't know if it's best, but it works for me. It worked for me. But I used more sand than I would use for making pottery. I made it very, very sandy, because I wanted it to stand up to, drying quickly. Like if I take a pot, I don't go sit it in the sun to dry because it'll crack, right? You can use up to, when I'm making pottery, I maybe use a third temper. But if I'm making adobe, I want closer to like 50% temper, because I'm not doing a lot of fine work. So get a little sandier than what you'd use for clay. Airstream Wandering says, would it make sense to preheat the kiln before putting the pottery in? Yeah, it can, especially if you have, like I said, a lot of thermal mass, which I don't have with the bricks. But if I had an adobe one, it takes a lot longer to reach temp. So yeah, you can preheat it. You can build a little pre-fire in it. Or what I would do is I wouldn't preheat my, if you've seen how I fire around like a campfire, I'll preheat my pottery by sitting them around the fire for an hour or so, right? Or sometimes I'll put them in my oven at home and preheat those pots. But what I did with my adobe kiln was I wouldn't bother preheating them in the oven. I'd put them in there, and then I just burn that fire real slow and real low for an hour or hour and a half, 2 hours, and just slowly bring the temperature up. And not only am I preheating the kiln, but I'm preheating the pottery at the same time. So I think that's the way you would do it, because you don't want to heat that pottery up too fast anyway. And that kiln is heating up slowly as well. Roy Campbell, I'm planning on copying yours in the spring. I'm using a barrel just now and having difficulties with burning too quickly and no control. Yeah, you know, it's like if you saw the video I made with my friend Bill Warner, he fires in that tandoor, and it's kind of like that. He just puts the fuel in, and then he lets it burn, and he doesn't have a lot of control. I mean, whatever wood is there, that's what burns. And then when he's done, if he wants, he can add more fuel. So yeah, you don't have the same kind of control, but you can kind of control the diameter of the fuel you use. That's going to control how fast it burns, and the volume of fuel, and that controls, you know, how hot it gets. So you have a little bit of control, but you have to kind of think ahead, right? I'm going to add this much fuel. How hot is this going to get? I'm looking for that video for you, Roy, where I fired in, where I went to Bill's house and fired. Here it is. So here, I'll put the link right here in the chat for you. That's for you, Roy. That's the one, my friend Bill Warner, who fires in a tandoor, and it's very similar to your way of firing, so it might help you. Dylan, no, he's answering Anthony. Fancycraft, I was thinking of using rough lava as the stone in my next kiln. Is that a bad idea? It's a good insulator, but also full of holes. I'm not sure. I don't think there'd be a problem with using lava stones. And like I said, it would be very insulative, like those bricks, those kiln bricks they use that have like fiber in them and stuff. It would be very insulative like that. So I would think that would work well. Duncan, how many red bricks are in your... yeah. If you go back and watch the... This is for you, Duncan. If you go back and watch the video where I made it, I tell how many bricks there are. But I'm going to tell you a secret. I can't remember numbers to save my life. So I don't remember how many bricks were in it now. Oh, poo. That's not what I wanted to do. Hold on a second. I'll get that link for you. Here it is. Okay. So this link is for you, Duncan. And that is the link to the video where I built the kiln. Okay. And in that video, I talk about I don't just tell about how many bricks I use. I also give the price breakdown, like how much I spent for the barbecue grate and how much I spent for the bricks, so you can get an idea how much it cost. Now, since then, I've done some more work. I added that little grate in the firebox, so I used a little bit of more steel there, and then I bought those bricks to make the chimney out of, so I used a few more bricks. But I can't tell you off the top of my head how many bricks I used. I'm no good with numbers at all. Dylan's called that because it works at record temperatures. Jeffrey Connell, I saw your video yesterday where you fired in 15 minutes on the ground. What's the difference in the finished pot after leaving them in your brick kiln for 3 or 4? No, okay. So those pots that are fired for 15 minutes, right? Kind of dusty. The pots that are fired for 15 minutes, you know, they're ceramic. They can hold water and stuff, but they're softer. They're not as hard, right, as a pot that's fired to 800 degrees in the brick kiln. These Salato pots are fired to like 700 degrees. So that extra 150 degree temperature is going to make them that much harder. So Salato polychrome, which is what I'm making, but those little 15-minute surface fires, they're ceramics. I mean, they're not going to like get wet and melt or something, but they're not as hard as the other pottery. I'm sorry, I never transitioned that. This software again. It's going. Next month, you can say goodbye to this. Lanet Dave, for my first firing, I fired a pookie, a bowl, and a few test tiles. I put them in old stoneware plates as cover sherds. The plates cracked, but my new clay didn't. Yeah, I found that if I use like flower pots and stuff in my firings, they're more likely to crack than my own pottery because they don't have the level of temper that I use. And so if you're using stoneware or like terracotta flower pots in one of the firings like I'm doing, you may find that they crack a lot because they're not tempered. They can't handle that the same levels of thermal shock. For the first, the Liger of Shinar, War Wizard and Rogue, cool name. What do you do if your jar does not show different things? What do you do if your jar does not show different things? I'm sorry, Ligar of Shinar. I'm not getting it. My jar does not show different things. I don't know. Asaf Shavul, what about downwind kiln for better efficiency? What would that mean? Like putting the firebox towards where the wind direction is? Because I live in town, so there's walls around my yard. I don't think there's a wind direction. If I was out in the country, then maybe. But like I said, I used to use that fan. If you see the early videos where I was firing that brick kiln, I'd put a fan in front of it. But just opening it up and putting that grate at the bottom and building that little chimney at the top, I don't even need a fan anymore. It's working just fine without a fan. So I don't think the wind direction is needed if you do it right. Liger of Shinar, I live in El Paso and think it's chalky and will not separate for clay and silt. Give it a try. No, give it a try first, Ligar, because like half of El Paso was built with adobe bricks back in the day. There's clay there. Try it first. Try it before you decide. You're right next to New Mexico. They build with adobe constantly in New Mexico to this day. BJ, I have yellow clay. If fire in open, it stays yellow. If I use coal, it turns red. Any ideas why? Your yellow clay has iron in it. That's why it's yellow. It's iron oxide. Why it would stay yellow? Most yellow clays will fire to red. So I have no idea why you're... Is it possible you're not getting it hot enough in the firing? I've never seen yellow clay that fired yellow, ever. Liger of Shinar, I can make good rammed earth, though. Hey, rammed earth requires a lot of the same proportions as adobe. I think it's a little sandier. But you may very well have what you need. Or, like I said, you may be able to amend it. Just add bring in a truckload of clay and just add like 1 shovel of clay to every 4 shovels of dirt. And you may find you have exactly what you need. Anthony, is there any way to make a natural paint that is blue color? Oh, no. I did a video on that not long ago. You cannot get blue using natural minerals, at least in these kind of firings. You have to use like a commercial underglaze if you want to get blue. Blue or green, either one are off limits. I think like cobalt or something, but that's not something we find naturally in this area. Azurite, Dylan, azurite in a fire will turn gray or black. Thanks for the answer. So for your type of pottery, it's more about reaching the temp and then backing off, letting it burn down. Very cool. Can't wait. Yeah, no, you don't have to hold that temp for a long period of time. If you're making earthenware, I know nothing about, commercial glazed pottery at all. Could I use broken terracotta pots as cover shirts? Yes. Like I said, SF, I have used broken terracotta pot. In fact, one of the pictures here, I used broken terracotta pots. Let me see if I can find that picture real quick. Not there, not there. Not there. I'm looking for it. Hold on. This one here. So you can see from this picture, most of those cover sherds are broken flower pots. And they do work. Like I said, they have a tendency to break easily in the firing because they're not tempered as much as my clay. And so they can't handle that thermal shock that you get from these quick firings. Copper salts work to buy. They turn grayish in low wood fire. Yeah, that's the trouble, is your coppers, which are blue and green, don't stay that way in the firing. They come out gray or black. Okay, where are we at here? I got about 7 minutes left. I used 80 to 100 bricks, Anthony says. I've got to go. Thanks you, Andy, live stream. Okay, thanks, Dylan. Thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing your information to other people, too. Stephen, instead of stacking bricks in a cone, just get 2 steel buckets, large and small, cut the bottoms off, and stack on top. Perfect Venturi effect and easy to remove for access your wear. Okay, that's a neat idea. I'd like to see that done. I would test the lava rocks in an open fire first. Had the same idea with volcanic tuff and ended up spalling. Yeah, well, tuff is different than lava rocks, though. Tuff was ash, and then it was compressed into stone. Lava rocks come directly out of hot lava. And it's my experience that lava rocks are really great to use as kiln furniture because they're unlikely to ever break or spall or explode or anything because they've already been tested by fire. I've heard of ceramic stills to make certain traditional hard liquors such as tequila. It's this ancient ceramic method for distilling. Would love to see more there. Oh, yeah, I don't know anything about that. Maybe I might be a fun experiment, but I don't know anything about distilling liquor using a ceramic still. I've never heard of a ceramic still. My grandfather was a moonshiner back during Prohibition. Stills and clay does not separate. Silt and clay does not separate. Well, it should. And maybe you maybe don't have clay and only have silt, or maybe you only have silt and not clay. Ren Pixie, I'm using a pot belly stove for heating. I'm thinking how to use it for firing some small. Well, I know people, Ren Pixie. I know people fire in their wood stoves. People fire in wood stoves I mean, my first firing when I was a kid was in my parents' wood stove, and I know people do it. So give it a try, but you're going to have to get the temperatures up there. So, there's probably a trick to it. I can't say that I know what that trick is. Message retracted. I tried Smectite slip and my pot came out bright, but the slip was black. Any idea why? Yeah. So some of that Smectite, even like the Cannonball Mesa White, which is really popular with like Anasazi replicators, it has an affinity for carbon. So it'll absorb carbon out of the atmosphere really strongly in the early parts of the firing. And then you got to oxidize it like heck to get that burned out. So that's why I try to fire, like if you saw the video I released yesterday, real open, not closed in at all. I keep that wood real open, and that way the pottery never gets really, really sooty. But even if it does, I fired some Salado pottery at the Kiln conference from Leslie Lynn, and she used Cannonball, and it came out kind of dark. So it will absorb that carbon, and then you have to oxidize it out. If your pottery comes out of the fire and it's kind of dark, sometimes you can put it back in and just fire it up there again and let it burn a little longer and get that carbon burned out. You can refire those and get good results in some cases. I've done it, and I have friends that have done it. Fancy Craft. Do you know anything about Georgia red clay? I know it's yeah, we have a lot of red clay here in Arizona, and where I grew up in Sierra Vista, it was like that, red clay everywhere. And if you were a kid and you were out playing in the dirt, you'd come home with it on your clothes, and your mom would get mad because it wouldn't come out. I suppose Georgia red clay is the same as red clay anywhere. You certainly can make pottery out of it. You can make kilns out of it. Ceramic still most likely called an alembic. Okay. Be careful when firing in a wood stove. You can drive a lot of heat up your chimney and could cause a fire. Yeah, well, that was my concern, Mrs. Adams. You have to. A lot of stoves aren't really designed to get to temperatures like 700 degrees Celsius. I mean, they just aren't. I grew up. We spent a lot of time up at my grandfather's cabin in the mountains and there's a little wood stove. And when I got to be a teenager and we'd go up there and camp, without adults, right? And we'd stuff it full of wood, and that stove would start to glow orange. We'd get it so hot the metal was glowing, and and that makes the metal kind of like start to sag, and it's not good for the stove. So my concern is, some of those stoves aren't made to get that hot. If you'd like, I'd be happy to send you some information on the ceramic steel research I have. Yeah, why don't you email that to me, D Mushroom Guy. Go to my website and click on the contact form, and then you can generate an email that way, and then I'll respond, and then we can just email back and forth, okay? Can you fire small pieces in a chimenea? Now, I have no experience with firing in a chimenea, but I have some friends up in Moab who fire in a chimenea, and I would love to make a video showing how they fire in their chimenea, because I think there's a lot of people that would like to see that. But Glaz Gavlin, it can be done, but I can't give you any advice because I don't know how to do it. But yeah, it can be done. Thanks for answering my question, Fancy Crafts. Thanks for asking it. You're correct. There are many designs though. Mrs. Adams, I've been firing river clay in a microwave kiln I just got. It heats up so fast the clay is not broke, just burn out. Microwave kiln? I've never even heard of that. That's crazy. Like a microwave oven, but it's a kiln. Is that right? And it like heats your pottery up through microwaves? I've never even considered that. That's crazy. Is that a real thing? Wow. That's blowing my mind, Mrs. Adams. I don't know anything about it. I can't say, but it sounds like a neat idea. All right, everybody. Where are we at here? Jeffrey Conley. Andy, I found a marl the other day. It's red clay, decomposed ash, blue, white, jumbled together. It looks promising, but wondering if you have any experience. Down where I grew up in Sierra Vista, there's marls. And I've toyed with them. But you got to remember that marls are full of calcium. So there's also potential problems. So I think it would be the same advice I gave in that caliche video. Keep the temperatures low, and and grind it real thoroughly so there's no big possibly chunks of calcium in it. But experimentation is going to be the key. It always is when you find new clay, whether it's a marl or not. They were made for melting glass. The microwave kiln. Huh? That's crazy. I'd never heard of microwaves being used for anything other than microwave ovens. Of course, microwave communications, but that's not the same. From melting glass. It's a kiln that goes in your microwave. What? It goes in a microwave? I'm going to have to look this up. Microwave kilns are a real thing and they're cheap. I'm going to look this one up. That's crazy. All right. I'm learning something new from you guys now. All right, everybody. Got more questions or are we done for the day? I'm in South Carolina. Red clay works great. Well, I mean, the thing, BJ, is every clay is different, and I could tell you about my red clay experience in Sierra Vista or the red clay I used from out by Sonoyta today. But it's going to be different from the red clay that somebody has in Georgia and what you have in South Carolina. You got to get out there. All clays are different. Get your hands on it. Put some sand in it. Practice making something. Try firing it. See how it does. You've got to test those clays. What raw materials can you use to make a low fire glaze? You're not talking to the right person. Advice: finding good natural clay here in Arizona without harming environment. Okay, 2 questions here. Low fire glaze, you're looking at lead. And I have a video about lead glaze paint that I did last year. You can check that out. I don't know anything about other types of low fire glazes. I'm not into glazes. I think my pottery's pretty. It doesn't have to be glazed to be pretty or even useful. Don't get stuck in that glaze thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with glazes, but that's just one small avenue that you can go down. There's a million other ways to finish your pottery. Okay, Glass Gavin, you're looking for natural clay here in Arizona? There's clay everywhere in Arizona. I don't know what part of Arizona you're in, but tell you what, if you shoot me an email, go to my website, click on the contact form, shoot me an email, tell me where you're at in Arizona, and I could probably give you some advice on where to find clay in Arizona. All right, make an adobe kiln. Should you create an actual igloo type opening? Yeah. So, real quick, Charlene Thomas, pine needles. It would just be real quick, Charlene. Let me find the picture I'm looking for. So here's the first one I made, and I didn't have like I said, an igloo opening. I didn't have a little firebox coming out from it. And then I later learned that that's what I want. You want to be able to add more fuel. So that allows you to add more fuel that's all being drawn up into and over the fire. All that heat is getting sucked in through that firebox and then up over the pottery. So you could make that firebox, depending on your wood, right? You could make it, a couple feet long. Just long as you can get wood all the way back in there. Because the more fuel you have burning at once, the more temperature you're adding at once too. So, yeah, you can do that. And pine needles would be just like adding hay to adobe. It would add to like a temper, like a fiber temper. Sand is a better temper because it doesn't create air voids in your material. All right, guys. Thank you so much for all your videos. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate all y'all coming along today. I appreciate all your questions. Have a great rest of the year, and I'll see you guys in January.